Hello, and thank you for joining me in this solo episode of Cromaine's Desert Island Favorites. It's been so hot, and I think we're all looking forward to celebrating the end of the dog days of summer. Fun fact, they're not called the dog days of summer because they have us all panting like our favorite furry friends in the heat. It's because our sun shares the sky with Sirius, also known as the dog star, which is not only the brightest star in the sky, but also the brightest star in the constellation Canis Major. So there's your fun nerdy fact for the day before we get to today's video. But also, it's been really hot outside, and I kind of feel like panting right now. What better way to celebrate the end of the dog days of summer than by talking about some of our favorite media about or featuring dogs? I've got a few of my favorite dog-related items ready to recommend to you, but I should note before I start that I don't have a lot of the classics that you're probably expecting to be here. The thing is, I love dogs, and I absolutely refuse to watch anything where I know the dog dies. I'm just not gonna do that to myself. And I'm just not gonna watch those movies, ever. So don't recommend them to me. I'm not gonna watch or read the books where I know a dog is kind-hearted and just a beautiful, fluffy little ball of love, and they die in the end. Why would I do that to myself? And I'm also not gonna recommend something that I've never seen myself. If you're like me and you also don't appreciate watching our fluffy friends die, I have a website for you. It's called doesthedogdie.com, and it will tell you if a movie that you're about to watch features a dog who dies. That said, yes, my list does hypocritically feature several items where the dog does die because it's so hard to find something where that doesn't happen. I don't know why movies and books insist on killing the dog. It's really upsetting. That said, I'll be upfront and tell you why these books and movies are still in my list, even though the dog may or may not die in many of them. I'm going to tell you what sets it apart from those emotionally manipulative movies where the dog just kind of dies in the end just to make everybody cry. That said, in no particular order, here is my list. Man's Best Friend is probably my most obscure choice on this list. It's a 1993 thriller starring Ali Sheedy, who is like the darling of the 80s and maybe a little bit into the early 90s. She plays this journalist who's doing an expose about genetic engineering and animal experimentation, and she unwittingly frees this dog, Max, from a facility. Max has been genetically engineered to be faster, stronger, smarter, basically like super-powered version of a dog, and he's a really big dog. He's basically like the $1 Million Man if the $1 Million Man was a dog instead. He's got so many cool abilities, and he becomes ferociously protective of Ali Sheedy's character. Meanwhile, Lance Henriksen, who's always a good time, plays the doctor who made Max and knows how dangerous he is. Nobody, except for maybe his murder victims, seems to realize how dangerous Max is until it's too late. Man's Best Friend is kind of a riff on maybe like an 80s slasher or one of those 90s thriller movies that was like really popular in the late 80s and early 90s, only instead of a mentally unstable, say, roommate or just a boyfriend or something like that, it's a dog, which is more terrifying because dogs are so cute and adorable. This movie does a really great job of kind of like humanizing the dog and making you feel empathy for something that's so terrorizing. In that way, it's a lot like Cujo by Stephen King. I've never seen the movie, so I'm going to be talking about the book, which I listened to on Hoopla just last year. Cujo is about a family in Maine. Duh! What else did Stephen King write about? They're trapped in their car. They have this crappy, I believe it's a Pinto or something like that, and they take it to the local mechanic who, unbeknownst to them, their giant St. Bernard has been infected with rabies. I feel like this is the kind of story that would be really boring if it was written by anyone other than Stephen King, because it's essentially like, yeah, there's a side plot about a husband and the owner of the junkyard's this alcoholic who's planning on like a boys' night away to the big city, I think it's Boston. But essentially, most of the action takes place inside the car where it's this mother and her very young child who are beset by this giant St. Bernard who's just kind of prowling around after having killed several people already. The book is very clear that Cujo is a good boy who is driven mad by this disease after he follows a rabbit back to its rabbit hole and kind of scares a bat who is infected with rabies out, so the dog gets it. Stephen King writes several chapters as the disease is progressing from the dog's point of view. It's this really unique blend of being heartbreaking and terrifying, both for the family and kind of for the dog. You feel really bad for the dog at the end of this book because It's not his fault. He's a good boy. The disease just made him do really bad things because he wasn't himself. Cujo's available on Hoopla and Libby, both in audiobook and ebook format, so definitely check that out. Okay, we've had a couple horror things starring dogs. Why don't we try to switch it up and get to a comedy? I'm talking about 1999's classic Tom Hanks movie, Turner and Hooch. Tom Hanks plays Scott Turner. He's this kind of uptight, neat freak detective. He's trying to make it through his last couple days on the job in this small, sleepy town, and he's moving to the city to become a detective in this big city where he can get in on some real action. Until Amos Reed, a local fisherman, dies, and the only witness is his big, slobbery, messy, misbehaving dog, Hooch. This is almost like a buddy comedy police procedural movie, only instead of, Tom Hanks plays the straight man and the wise guy is played by this dog, who is just a force of nature with his behavior. He just runs around kind of destroying things, and Scott is this really straight-laced guy. This is, I think, the only movie in the list that's a real tearjerker at the end. It's not manipulative, it's definitely like a story-driven thing that happens, but spoiler alert, Hooch does die, and it's heartbreaking. But the rest of the movie is so fun and so funny, and there's kind of like this little denouement of the film is so funny, and it brings it right back full circle, and I just love this movie. It's available through interlibrary loan, so definitely place a hold for Turner and Hooch if you haven't seen it. Apparently Disney Plus in 2021 came out with a series, like a remake, but it's a series instead of a movie. I haven't seen it. I probably never will because you can't improve on the original, but it's there if you want it, I guess. Lastly, and definitely my all-time favorite piece of media that features a dog is the 1993 film, The Sandlot. I was 13 in 1993, and there were two things 13-year-old Erik loved: dogs and baseball. And this movie is about both. You could argue that the dog in the movie is not really a main character or much of a character at all, except for being involved in this epic chase scene at the very end of the movie. But I think the whole plot of the movie hinges on the existence of this dog, and it's almost like the movie wouldn't exist if the dog wasn't a feature of it. This is one of the few movies that when I was entering my terrible teens as I was 13 and too cool to hang out with my parents, that me and my parents could sit down and watch together because I was about the age of those kids. And my parents, this movie takes place in the late 50s or 60s, maybe the early 60s. I'm not sure they ever actually explicitly give a year, but my parents would have been that age during that time, and my father always talked about his days playing sandlot baseball with his friends. So this is definitely a movie that can be enjoyed by the entire family. It's rated PG. I'm not even sure why it's rated PG. There's no bad language. There's no, obviously, sex. Very little of what I would even consider violence, unless you count a dog running through a parade kind of thing violence. Be that as it may, this movie is about Scott Smalls, who's a new kid in town. He just moved to this town. It's the beginning of summer vacation, and he has no friends. But there's this group of kids who play baseball every single day at the Sandlot down the street. To kind of wiggle his way into this friend group, he just starts showing up at the Sandlot, and he's really terrible at baseball. So he volunteers his father's prize baseball one day. Of course, he hits a home run, a towering shot over this fence. The problem? This baseball was signed by Babe Ruth, and he has to get it back before his father returns from a business trip. The other problem? The fence that the ball flew over is the junkyard that is guarded by this giant, massive dog of legend. This movie is one of the best family-friendly, coming-of-age comedies I can think of. It's funny, it's poignant, and it's so quotable. I think everyone I know says, "You're killing me, Smalls." And anytime someone says the word forever, I just want to say, forever, forever, forever. See, I can't stop. Forever, forever. Whew, sorry about that, I got stuck in a loop there. Forever. I'll stop now. You get the point. The Sandlot is great. I think it's always on TV, but it's also available in our juvenile DVD collection, so definitely check out The Sandlot. It's a great movie, even if you couldn't care less about baseball. Our main character barely knows anything about baseball at the start of the movie, and it's just so much fun, so nostalgic, so great. I can't recommend it enough. And that's all I have for this month. I won't be seeing you in September, unfortunately, but I'll be back in October to tell you about some of my favorite underappreciated horror authors. Until then, stay cool, and definitely say hi to your dog for me, Hartland.